Hi there, my name is Mel and I'm here to tell you today that you can keep yourself in control when everything is out of control. And we're also going to look at how you can optimize your brain to optimize your life. Now let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today and then I'll introduce myself. So we're going to talk about your brain. I'll introduce a few little bits and pieces about your brain. We're going to look at how you can stay in control. We're going to look at some thinking traps that you might fall into every now and again. We're going to look at how to keep your brain working well, which will be very important on a busy week like this. We'll talk about how to train your intuition, and finally about how to manufacture an insight. And what I'm going to do as we go through the next 40 minutes or so today is I'm going to introduce a couple of people to you, Gary and Susan, and I'm going to talk to you in the form of a story, and we'll see these guys as they go through a week in their lives at work. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Mel Russell. I like to call myself a master practitioner in the dark arts of humanity. These days, there's a lot of neuroscience that's coming out that's telling us about how our brain works. And it's really interesting because a lot of the things that we've known instinctively for a long time are now becoming scientifically proven. But I still think there's a great deal of art to how to get on with people. And it's so important because, of course, we're all people. And does anyone work with a person? Yeah, exactly. So we're surrounded by these blinking people, and we need to understand how to get the best out of ourselves, and that helps us to get the best out of other people as well. So a little bit about my experience. I have had, go away, Gary. I've had 20 plus years or so in human resources across a variety of industries. And then the last five out of the last 6 years, I've been involved with Vend, which is a cloud-based point-of-sale system, which my ex and I started up and built the culture there and really got interested in understanding how we are at work and how other people are at work. Also, I'm a trained neuro-leadership coach. So neuro-leadership is just a fancy word for figuring out how your brain works and how to get the best out of people. So I coach people like yourself and how to become better leaders. So let's look at Gary. So Gary is one of the guys that we're going to be talking about today when we are looking at the brain and how to keep ourselves under control and other brain hacks. So, Gary, he's just taken on a job. He's the Chief Product Officer at this new company called Wardrobe. Now, Wardrobe is an idea that my 12-year-old daughter came up with, and I'm giving it away here free today if anyone wants to make this reality. Wardrobe, you go into your wardrobe and you take photos of all of your clothes and you upload them onto your mobile app. And then it will suggest unique combinations for you of your existing clothing, things that you might not have thought of. And then it partners with its retail partners, and it will suggest other items of clothing that you might want to add to your wardrobe. It's a great idea. Someone please run with it. Anyway, so Gary has just taken up the CPO role at Wardrobe, and it's his biggest job so far. It's his first time at the leadership table, and he really wants to make it a success. He sees that Wardrobe has an amazing opportunity to really go places, and he wants to ride that wave. Now, Gary he's the type of guy that just gets shit done. He doesn't make excuses. He likes to just, get in there and make things happen. And he's really enjoying it because his boss, Susan, I'll introduce to you in a minute, has given him full rein. In particular, Gary's last boss was a little bit of an asshole. Has anyone had experience of this before? Yeah. So his last boss was a little bit of a micromanaging asshole. And so Gary is quite pleased to be working now with Wardrobe. Now, do I have any Garys in the house? Do I have anyone who's really ambitious, just likes to go out there and get things done, wants to, make a mark in life? Great, I've got some Garys. Awesome, nice to hear. Okay, now we have Susan. Okay, so Susan is the founder of Wardrobe. Susan is also the sort of person that likes to get out there in life and make things happen, but she's had a little bit more experience than Gary. In particular, she had a startup before, but unfortunately it crashed and burned, as sometimes these things do. So she's been through the school of hard knocks, and she knows a little bit more. Do I have any Susans in the house? Not many Susans, okay. Or any Sams. We could have a male name on Susan. All right. So, what are we going to do first? Now I've introduced the characters, we're going to have a little look at the brain, and I just want to tell you a few things about the brain. So this is a brain here, and there's 3 bits that I want to introduce to you. First of all, we've got our prefrontal cortex, and this is really important because this is where we do all of our logical thinking and reasoning. I hope that that's what you're using right now when you're listening to me. Then we have another part of the brain as well called the limbic system, and the amygdala and the hippocampus are part of the limbic system, and this is really important. This is the thing that's triggered by novelty, by fear, by anxiety, by new things. So if after this conference you're walking across the road to go and get a burrito or something, and a bus is barreling down towards you, the thing that's going to keep you safe is your amygdala. It's just going to say, hey, get out of the way. It's very, very powerful, very fast. It's designed to keep you safe, which is great. But sometimes it tries to keep you safe when things seem scary, but you're not actually in any physical danger. Now, the other thing about the brain is how it all works. So in our brains, it's incredible. We have more than 100 billion neurons, and our brains just aren't that big, right? So that's a lot of neurons in there. And our brains function when these neurons fire together and they activate each other through electrochemicals. And it's really interesting because the firing of those electrochemicals, they determine every thought, every feeling, and every action that we ever take. Now, I find that absolutely incredible. So everything starts with these neurons firing. Now, there's this saying that neurons that fire together wire together. And the more that these neurons fire in a sequence, the better they get. So if we imagine Dan Carter's there and he's going to kick the ball over the cross, whatever you call it. Thank you. He's not thinking about that rationally, right? Because that is so hardwired into his brain. Those neurons have fired together so long that the connection is really, really strong. And our brains do try to hardwire everything that they can. It's also been discovered that neurons that wire apart. So when neurons stop firing together, they just lose interest in each other and align themselves apart. Now, it's much easier to create new wiring than it is to try and get rid of old wiring. So have I got any ex-smokers in the house? Put your hand up. Okay. Did anyone quit smoking by chewing gum? I see a couple of hands. So this is a situation where it can be far easier to replace an old habit with a new habit, and that's backed up by what we know about neuroscience. So we have in a brain cell the size of a piece of sand, so tiny. We have 10,000 neurons, 1 billion synapses all talking to each other. And did you know that information in your brain can go faster than a Formula One race car at up to 268 miles per hour? Now, the really interesting thing here, and the thing that I want you to remember from this little bit about how the brain works, is that any thought, Any feeling and any behavioural pattern can be unlearnt and replaced with a new one. Now, I'm going to say that again because it has massive implications for everyone sitting in this room. Any thought, any feeling, and any behavioural pattern can be unlearnt and replaced with a new one. So as we go through this talk today, and if you listen to me and go, well, this is great what Mel's talking, but I could never do that. Well, I'm going to call bullshit on that. And I'm going to tell you that any thought, feeling, or behavioural pattern can be unlearnt and replaced with a new one. Okay. So let's go back to Gary. So, Gary's in his role and he really wants to make this a success. And Susan has given him free rein to do what he wants to do with the product. So he's decided that he's going to refactor. Things are taking a little bit longer to build. The platform's a little bit shonky. There's a couple of bugs that are coming up which are hard to fix. So he's decided that he wants to refactor. Now, I know that refactoring is often contentious. Has anyone dealt with a refactor here? Yeah, so leave your hand up if there's a lot of debate going on about whether refactoring is the right thing to do or not. Yeah, I was actually talking to someone the other day who had just come out of a very interesting meeting with their product owner where they had to explain the last five weeks' work that they'd just spent on refactoring with no new features. So it's a great topic for us to talk about here. Anyway, what happens is that Susan didn't quite mean this amount of free rein. When she said, hey, Gary, go do what you like, she didn't really mean, hey, just, put everything on ice and refactor. She finds out on Friday night that Gary has decided to refactor, and she gets a little bit peeved. Okay. So what happens is that they have a very interesting weekend. She spends all weekend thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe that this is happening. This is going to be the death of my business. She sent an email off to Gary saying, what on earth are you doing? I want to see you in my office first thing Monday morning. Gary is upset. They're both really anxious. What's happening in their brain is that their amygdala has been fired. There's a whole lot of hormones going around in their system. Now, Susan can actually get herself under control a little bit better because she's come from the school of hard knocks. This is the first time Gary's been in this situation, and because he had, his last manager was a bit of a micromanaging, he's having real trouble down-regulating his limbic system. So they are both a little bit peeved. Now, in my experience, this is really, really common. I see this all the time. People get triggered at work by things and they get annoyed, they lose the ability to think about things rationally. It's happened so often, I can guarantee it will happen to you in the next week. Someone is going to do something to piss you off. And it's my hope that I can teach you some skills to deal with that. So, it's Monday morning. They burst in, they have this meeting, and it goes like this. Over here, I'm Gary, and over here, I'm Susan. Right, Gary. Honestly, Susan, I thought free rein was free rein. If we don't refactor the code, we are sunk. And I, for one, I don't want to be part of a sinking ship. Susan, but this is a big decision that goes way beyond product. You need to involve me in these sorts of things. Gary, you're not even a coder. How would you even know if it needs doing or not? I'm the expert here. This is what you're paying me for. Susan, I'm paying you to help make this business successful, not to slow us down to such an extent that we lose our momentum and die. Gary, oh, for God's sakes, it's just like my old job. I thought you were different, but obviously not. Then Susan has a little bit of a brainwave, and she says, look, why don't we calm down, meet again tomorrow, and give this another shot? I have seen this so many times. In fact, I remember a really interesting conversation I had with a woman in a tech company on the leadership table. And she said, Mel, they just won't listen to me. I have to yell louder. And I said, what's that going to do? You've already been yelling. Don't yell louder. So in these sort of situations, it's a case of calling, time out and really thinking about, well, what might work in these sorts of situations. So here they are. They're both a little bit peeved and they need to get themselves under control. What strategies can we recommend for them? Has anyone got a fireproof strategy that they use to get themselves under control when everything is out of control? If you do, just yell it out. Breathe. Breathe. That is so good. Thank you so much. Because, are we all breathing? Is anyone here not breathing? No, okay. I'm so pleased that we've ascertained that. Right. But breathing is so important. It's one of the key things of mindfulness because it brings us into the present moment. And having a mindful breath is really different from just normal breathing. Who's keen to have a mindful breath with me? Yeah? Okay, so what we'll do is I'll say go, and then on go, we're going to breathe in and breathe out. It'll probably be a little bit deeper than your normal breath. And the key is you just focus on your breath and nothing else. Okay? All right. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, go. Ta-da! Mindfulness 101. Well done. So taking a breath is a really important part, and it's part of mindfulness. Now, here are some other techniques that you can use to get yourself under control. Write down your thoughts. So your thoughts, they go around in your head, and they're really, really hard to see up there, and they kind of get a life of their own. Well, I'll tell you what, I use I hope no one ever gets into my phone, into my notes, because I write all my thoughts down there. It'd be bloody interesting reading, I can tell you. So find something like a journal or notes on your computer and write your thoughts down and actually see what you're thinking. It's revolutionary. Make a plan. So when we're in the drama of a situation, we're not thinking straight. All it can do sometimes is just to make a plan, to think, what am I trying to achieve here? What am I actually trying to achieve can be enough to get you thinking straight. Here's one that's gold. Be curious and not judgmental. So in this little role play back here, do you see these guys were really judgmental of each other? They thought that they were right and the other person was wrong. When we're curious, what we're doing is we're asking questions like, oh, I wonder why that person thinks that. Or, oh, that's really interesting. Why am I so het up about this? So that you're not looking at it like you're right and they're wrong, or you're wrong. You're just being curious and wanting to know a little bit more about the situation. You can change your perspective, and you can also use techniques like I statements, which I won't go into today, but which are awesome. Now, the important thing to remember is that, remember I said before, our amygdala, it's quite clever, but in some ways it's a little bit dumb as well. So it can't tell the difference between if a bus is barreling down towards us or if we are just slightly out of our comfort zone. So this thing's going to go off all the freaking time. And a lot of the time, if you're like me, you want to go out of your comfort zone. Who likes being out of their comfort zone? Oh, come on, all you other people. Put your hands up. Come on, there you go. That's better. So when you're out of your comfort zone, things can get a little bit scary. But remember, just because you're out of your comfort zone doesn't mean that you're in a danger zone. So these techniques are really good, not just when you're dealing with a situation, but when you're dealing with yourself and you want to take a risk and your brain's there going off telling you that you shouldn't, well, hey, use some of these techniques to determine what you want to do that's best for you. Okay. So Gary and Susan get together and they talk it out. So Susan's got herself under control here, and she comes up with this beautiful statement, which is based on a nice little technique to get your message across kindly. So she says, "Hey Gary, you made a decision to refactor the code without asking me first. I'm feeling upset because it's a big decision and I really need to be involved in it. I do need you to discuss things like this with me, and I'd like to talk this over this week. That way, if it's the right thing to do, we can get onto it and you'll have my full support. Is that cool?" Gary's also got himself under control. He had a terrible sense of regret. You know, sometimes you leave a meeting and you have that terrible sense of regret. It's like, what have I done? He had a little bit of that. So he realised that Susan is not his old boss, that he really does want this job. So they decide that they're going to book in some time later on that week to talk about the refactor. Now, this is the key message here. You can learn to get yourself under control for when you get triggered in a situation, or for when you willingly take that step out of your comfort zone and you need to deal with some discomfort. You have the ability to get yourself under control. You can unlearn old ways of doing it and you relearn new ways, new techniques to help you be better. Okay, so Gary and Susan get together to make a decision. The problem is, Gary has gone out that night. So Gary's girlfriend's been having a friend of hers is leaving from work and they are having a leaving do. He goes out just for one drink. One drink turns to two drinks turns to four drinks turns to, hey, who's counting anymore? And he stumbles into bed at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, does this resonate with anyone? Yeah, I think Thursday night. Who's going to the party on Thursday night? Yeah. Well, you might just want to bookmark this in your mind for Friday morning. Okay, so he goes out and he has one too many. He goes to bed. He's been having a little bit of a touch of insomnia. You know, this is a big job for him. He's been working loads of hours, lots of stress, and it's starting to catch up with him. Nevertheless, he pulls himself out of bed the next morning and heads off to work. And here they are at the meeting about to make a decision. This is how the meeting goes. Gary's over here. Look, in my experience, it's been vital to do a refactor early on to ensure the code is stable in the future. And, you know, in my last job, we didn't do a refactor and we got absolutely hammered by bugs that we just couldn't get on top of. We lost our customer loyalty because of our shonky product. We slid from the top of the market down to fourth. And, you know, I know how to refactor. I've done it a couple of times before. I've totally got this. Susan's over here. Well, look, I have a completely different story. You might not know this, but my previous startup failed because we decided to refactor the code for the exact reason that you're talking about. But that decision meant that we had a good 6 months with no feature releases. And in that time, our competitors were busy releasing lots of features. We lost the early mover advantage. And by the time our code was done, the competitors taken over, and we lost the ability to raise any more investment money, and we were dead in the water. Now let's step back here and see what Gary and Susan are doing. So Gary and Susan are using their subjective, personalised information to make a decision. And this tallies with research that says that human beings are biased towards doing this. So, and this makes sense because we have, when we bring information in, we need to try and make sense of it super quickly as we can, so that we can move together quickly. But what this means is that we quickly string together only limited amounts of inputs, and we try and make sense of them. Now, this can be a problem because intelligent people can make bad decisions. Now, this is just one example of a thinking trap. There are, in fact, I have a book at home which has 50 thinking traps in it. And there are so many ways that our brains can trick us, and we think we're making a good decision, but in actual fact, we're falling into one of these traps. So when I'm working with people like yourself, I like to ask questions to push people into different frames of reference. So, for example, change your perspective. So a classic is, what would Google do? So we know that Google is all into big data and analytics. What would they do in this situation? It's a great question to ask yourself if you don't have much data. Or, here's a good one, what would my mentor advise me to do? Or you can even think, picture myself in 5 years' time, what would the 5-year-on Mel tell me to do? Play devil's advocate or the eternal optimist. So for some people, it's really easy to just think of all the good things that might happen. In that case, it's a great idea to wear the black hat and think, well, what bad things how could this go wrong? Or if you're the opposite and you wear the black hat all the time and you are used to that type of thinking, then ask yourself, how could this go right? How can I set this up for success? And ask yourself what information you don't have. So there are so many types of information that you could have. What are you missing? And then finally, touch base with your intuition. So your intuition is another data source, and I'll be talking about this in a moment. But oftentimes in technology in particular, we get so caught up with external data that we forget to touch in with our internal data. I see this all the time, these thinking traps. And there are 2 times that I see it most frequently, I guess. When I'm working with a manager and they have convinced themselves that they have a bad apple on the team. And all they can think of is everything that this person does wrong. All this person has to do is walk into work and they've already managed to stuff something up. Has anyone had this sort of situation before where you almost have these kind of glasses on that taint the way that you see someone? Has anyone had an experience of that or seen that? Yeah. So I see this all the time. So I like to ask people, well, what things have they done right? What are this person's redeeming qualities? And you see, when I'm asking that question, I'm forcing them to change perspective. And also, a little thing to be aware of is when you're hiring people, if you find your dream candidate who can do nothing wrong, I guarantee you've got your rose-tinted glasses on, because no one is perfect. So in those situations, when you think you've hired the perfect person, I always say, well, what are their development areas? How are they going to find this role a little bit difficult to get people out of these common thinking traps? So the key message here is that there are thinking traps that we can fall into, and you can debug your thinking just like you debug your code. And again, remember I said before, it's a great idea to write your thinking down. Exactly the same situation here. By writing your thinking down, you can start to see if you're falling into any of these common thinking traps, and you can start to debug it. It's a really good idea, when you are looking at data, because do you guys like data? Do you love data? Yeah, I don't even really need to ask that question, to be honest. So make sure that you find at least 3 data sources and find data that both supports and refutes what you're looking for to try and keep yourself out of these thinking traps. So, what happens? Well, Gary and Susan recognise that they might be falling into a thinking trap here by using their personalised information. So they go away and find some objective data sources. Susan's made a particular effort to get in touch with a previous colleague who she knows has a differing opinion from her and who is an expert in refactoring. This is Chloe, our third character today. So Gary's also gone and researched some data out of the States. He's found some good blogs to follow. And he's asked the Chief Revenue Officer to do some forecasting on what the material impact would be if they slowed down on their feature releases. So they have got some information here. They're doing well. Now, they get together on the next meeting and they get analysing all of this information. So, of course, they're pattern matching. They're trying to see if the situations that they have themselves at wardrobe at the moment match those that would be indicate that it's a good idea to do a refactor. So what they decide is that they have the right characteristics here at the moment at wardrobe, and they decide that they're going to go ahead with the refactor. They're pretty excited. The problem is that something is on Chloe's mind. Something just doesn't feel right about it. Now, Susan and Gary want to know more. The problem is that Chloe doesn't really know what it is. She's having a really hard time putting her finger on it. So they want to know more. Susan and Gary want to know more, but unfortunately, you know that boozy night that Gary went on? It's catching up with him. So what they decide to do is that they are going to go for a walk to the cafe. They decide to take this to a walking meeting, get out of the office, go to the cafe and have a meeting there. Now, this is a really good idea of Susan's, that she's had to take this walking meeting, because our brains, you know, they're just part of us. Our brains are just made of blood and guts like the rest of us, right? And so just like we can get tired, our brains can get tired as well. And this is a problem because when our brains are depleted, we're less able to regulate our behaviour. So we're more likely to react to something than to respond to something. So I think about this like a reaction is where something happens and boom, you react. And oftentimes this is just in the automatic way that you always react. Versus responding is where you find this tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of space between whatever's happened and how you choose to respond in it. And when you find that little space, that gives you the opportunity to choose what you want to do. And whether that's through a mindful breath or something else, that's when you can think, what does the best version of me, how do I want to respond to this? And that's really hard to do when you are depleted. You know, also, we're less able to think critically. So we're more like, when our brains are not in a great space, we're more likely to fall into one of these thinking traps. We like to avoid complexity. So when you've got a multifaceted problem and your brain is really tired and not working really well, you're more likely to just kind of see one side of that. And you're more likely to stick with the safe options, including the status quo. Now, I did some research for this talk and I found a couple of real doozies. So one of the really interesting ones that I found was that parole judges showed a tendency to keep the status quo when they were tired. So they were more likely to deny prisoners parole just before lunch and tea breaks, and it's a big difference. So 65% of prisoners appearing first thing in the morning were granted parole, but only 15% before morning tea and 10% late in the afternoon. So here you go, folks. If you're ever going up before a parole board, obviously you want to get there first thing in the morning. The other interesting thing, is anyone here living with a significant other? Okay, all right, so you'll find this interesting. So this was my favourite research that I found. So there was this research that tracked married couples and their blood sugar levels. And every evening they rated the level of anger that they were feeling towards their spouse. And the way they did this was gold. So what they did was they got a voodoo doll of their spouse and they gave this person pins. It's amazing. And then they indicated their level of anger through how many pins they would stick into this voodoo doll. And there was a beautiful link that showed that when blood glucose levels were lower, people tended to stick in more pins. So this is like just a bit of sort of marital counselling here as well, to make sure that you're keeping your significant other well fed with lots of sugar in their diet. So, if you want to work well, if you want your brain to work well, then you need to make sure that you get enough sleep, and look after yourself. And that's, one of the amazing things I found was that you only have to be 2% dehydrated before it has an effect on your memory and cognition. So even just, making sure that you're drinking enough water is going to have an impact on how well your brain is working. I think it's also really important from this, just to understand that if you've got an important decision coming up and you're not feeling all that sharp, try and delay it. Try and do something to look after yourself, push it off to the next day, because your brain is not going to work as well if it's depleted. So strategies to keep our brain in shape: drink a lot, get enough energy. So your brain does need glucose. If you're trying to make a big decision, maybe make it after you've had a snack, get some sleep, and have little rest. So keep your brain functioning by giving it a little rest every now and again. And you see lots of technology companies these days with nap rooms and all that kind of stuff. But even, just going for a walk out in nature would be enough to give your brain a rest. So the key message here is that you could optimize your thinking, which is kind of like your software, by optimizing your brain, which is kind of like your hardware. And I was, thinking with this, sometimes you go and you want to do a software update on an old computer and it doesn't really work, it crashes the system. And this is very similar to your brain. So you need to think about your brain as the hardware that you're dealing with, and keep that hardware in good shape. So let's go back to the story. So here are our mates, Gary and Susan and Chloe, and they are walking to the local cafe, and they're talking about the ruggers. So they're talking about who their favourite rugby players are. They're talking about the game that's coming up on the weekend. They're talking about what all the good teams have in common, their experiences playing or watching or coaching the game. And as they're walking down the street, Chloe's still got this thing. There's something on her mind and she doesn't know what it is. Now this, folks, this is intuition. Now, intuition is the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. I'm really interested, who here uses intuition in their decision making? Oh, that's great. I've got quite a few hands going up. That's awesome. Now, there are a couple of conditions under which you can really trust your intuition. And there's two of them, essentially. The first one is if you're an expert in this field. And the second one is if the conditions of this situation match the conditions under which you would normally make a decision. So I'm a mum. I have two daughters, 10 and 12, and I'll tell you what, man, I'm an expert on those girls. I know what they're going to do even before they know what they're going to do. So I have amazing intuition with them. One of them can be walking towards the kitchen, and I say, no. And I don't even say anything else. I go, oh, damn it, mum's got me again. But that doesn't mean that I'm an expert and I have intuition about other people's children. So you see, it can be very particular. And when you know that you're an expert in that field and the conditions are matching of this situation that you're having intuition about, are matching what you're an expert in, then you can trust that your intuition is going to be more or less on the money. And there was amazing, a while ago here in Auckland, I went for a breakfast talk with this leadership guy. He was telling me this amazing story about this Navy radar guy, and he was looking at the radar screen, and there was a blip on the screen, and it looked like a friendly blip. It was travelling at the right speed, had all the right characteristics, and yet something was telling him that it wasn't right. But when he looked at it, it looked right. But he had this super strong intuition, and he had to make a decision whether to send an order to shoot this thing down or not. And in the end, he did send the order to shoot it down, and it was the right decision because it wasn't friendly. But how did he know? So it was really interesting. They went and rewound the tape, and what happened was that the blip didn't appear off the side of the radar. It appeared partway into the radar screen. Now, his conscious brain couldn't pick this up, but his unconscious brain, with its super abilities to, for pattern matching, knew that there was something wrong there. So intuition can be incredibly powerful. Throughout all my years in tech, I've come across people who don't want to use their intuition in decision making, and they don't even want to listen to their intuition. It's like they just want to, if they could turn it off, they would. And this is a real shame because it can be super powerful, and intuition is just another data source. It's just like your NPS or your product feature roadmap. It's just that it's coming from inside. But how do you get good at trusting your intuition? Because for some people, it's hard for them to trust it. But the good news is that there are ways around this. So first of all, become an expert. Okay, so read a lot. Become an expert in the field. And by the way, one of the best ways to speed up your learning is to do reflective thinking. So learn something and then think about what you learned. Become aware of how your intuition feels. So you will feel your intuition in your body. You know, it's really easy to think about our brain. I used to think that I could just take my brain out of my head and kind of put it in a jar and send that along to meetings, and that would be all right. The rest of me was just kind of a thing to carry my brain around. But over the last couple of years, I've learnt that your body gives you data as well. So listen into your body to see how that intuition feels. And then pick a situation and try using your intuition on it. So pick something non-critical. Have a think about what your intuition, sense what your intuition is. And then you can click in your rational brain, your prefrontal cortex, and go through all of the data. It's just micro-observations. Go through all the micro-observations and try and figure out how you've got this intuition. And then, hey, give it a go and see what happens. So when you find a non-critical situation, you understand your intuition, you act on it, and then see what happens. Then you've got this learning cycle set up where you can get more confidence in your intuition in the future. So the key message here is just as you wouldn't ignore external data, don't ignore the internal data either. Okay, so what's happening here is that they're walking along and Chloe, she's got it. Boom. She's got an aha moment. She suddenly gets it. She realises that in all of the previous refactors that she's been involved in, there's been one thing that's made them successful or not, and that's been the importance of chunking each activity down and time boxing it. And she realises that if this doesn't exist, if this isn't set up this way, there's often scope creep and the whole thing gets out of control. She gets this sudden rush of energy, and she shares this with Gary and Susan, and all of a sudden they get it as well. They're like, yes, I totally understand, let's do this. So they decide, yes, they're going to go ahead with the refactor. They're going to manage it like a project, and they decide that Chloe is going to be Gary's kind of coach, like the rugby coach. So she's got the experience, so she's going to kind of guide him through what to do. They nail down a timeline to get the project plan complete. Now, it's no surprise that Chloe had this insight while they were walking to the cafe. So what are insights? Insights, they seem to appear out in our head out of nothing, but what they do, they all have one thing in common, that's they create a new perspective. So you take two things and you're merging them together to create a new thing, and that is what an insight is. Now, they can seem so rare in people because we're designed to be rational. And, rational thinking is often convergent and we're focusing in on one thing, whereas insights often come from divergent thinking. And then Also, they often happen when we're looking for broader, more abstract links. So, when you're looking at some data, rather than staring at the data and going, how does this relate to each other? How does this relate? It can help to broaden your focus and look at the wider problem, and that can help these insights occur. Actually, one of the best places to have an insight is in the shower. Who has good ideas in the shower? I know. Can someone please invent a waterproof notebook and pen for my shower? Because I swear I have so many great ideas in that place. But other places that really work for me is I walk the dog. I live down by the Tamaki River, and I walk the dog along the river, and it's such a great place for me to get insights. So here are a couple of strategies for you to generate an insight. So cram your brain. You have to put all the information in. Your brain cannot come up with the insight if it doesn't have the information. So cram it in there, read your report, get all of the information in. And then look for associations. So you might draw pictures or flow charts or draw arrows around, or like I was saying before, take your focus back from what's on the page to a wider focus. Find some unfocused time. So go for a walk, have a nap, take a shower. After you have crammed all of that information in, then let yourself be unfocused so that your brain can do the work. And also, you can think about things in a non-conformist way. So one of the great questions I love to ask people is, what should you not do? And you get some hilarious responses. It's really quite fun. I was reading that one of the great things that you can do is pretend that you're a punk rocker. So there you go. So the key message here is that you can organise your environment to get the maximum chance of an insight, and then harness the energy. When you get an insight, make sure that you harness that energy. So Gary and Susan and Chloe walk back, they're happy. They've solved this problem. Gary's happy in his job, Susan's happy, Chloe's happy. They've sorted out this refactor. They've learnt something about themselves, each other, and about the brain as they've gone through. But what have we learnt? So we've learnt that we can learn new things and unlearn old things. So the question here is, what new wiring could you learn to help you achieve your goals? We've learnt that we can get ourselves under control when things are out of control. So the question is, what technique, if you put this in your toolbox, would help you get yourself under control when you needed to? Thirdly, we've learnt that we can fall into thinking traps. So the question is, what techniques can you use to keep yourself clear of thinking traps? We've learnt that our brains don't work well when they're depleted. So the question is, what are we doing to make sure that our brains are working at their best? We've learnt that intuition as a valid data source. So the question is, how can you increase your confidence in your intuition? And we've learnt that you can generate an insight when you need one. So the question is, what can you do to increase the likelihood of regular insights in your life? And finally, my final message, by optimising your brain, you can optimise your life. Thank you very much.